Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Porky's Movie Mystery, released in 1939. It's the 234th in the series and it's directed by Bob Clampett. You can currently find this on the Porky Pig 101 DVD set. I have a link below to that set. Now, in case you haven't seen this cartoon, I can't show you the full thing here as it's under copyright by Warner's, but the Phantom is at large, and so it is up to Mr Moto, who is played by Porky Pig here, and he's on the case. So first up, you're going to see a re-edit of the original audio commentary I did before I had to take that down. Thanks to my good friend Blue Genocide for re-editing that for me, and then you're going to hear some new thoughts as well, so grab some popcorn and enjoy. This one is essentially taken from a series of films at the time that were released between 1937 and 1939, starring a character called Mr Moto. Here it's M-O-T-T-O, but it's M-O-T-O in the in the correct version of the novels and the movies. The movie starred Peter Lorre, and so yeah, it's basically Peter Lorre doing yellow face. It's not something that would certainly happen today. If you were to do the series of films with someone of Japanese descent, you'd certainly get someone who actually is, Japanese. And they were considering actually making the character Korean, from what I was reading for the trivia. So there you go. You're going to see a lot of footage that was taken from an earlier cartoon, The Blowout, which is one of my favourite early Tex Avery Porky Pig cartoons. It's definitely one that's worth watching. What's really interesting is just how this came out just before World War II, so before Pearl Harbor, when of course the US got involved in World War II, and like at the time, of course, the Japanese. There were issues involving various occupations at the time. So this has two classic monsters. So we got you got the Invisible Man, and then you got Frankenstein's monster early on. So this character is voiced by Billy Bletcher, but who is revealed to be is of course someone else. But yeah, it's interesting how the first cartoon 1939 was referenced to the Lone Ranger, and this one's the Mr Moto series. And we saw there was the Four Daughters. That was a reference to a movie released, I think, a year before this came out. So, yeah, Bob Clampett must have really, really loved his movies. And I wonder how he got this past the censors here, because clearly it's like, yeah, a double meaning right there, the whole, great guns. So those were my original thoughts at the time, so here are a few things that I missed. So first of all, here is a reference I missed.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America. This is your Hollywood correspondent, Walter Winchell.
That is, of course, a reference to Walter Winchell, who was an American gossip columnist, and he was a news commentator at the time. I like this part here, how it just satirizes the whole dramatic lighting that you would see in a lot of movies at this time when it came to, movie mysteries and that sort of thing, where you think it's this big, police officer, and it ends up being, well, in pure Clampett fashion, yeah, little dude. Here is a reference that you see in many, many Clampett cartoons.
Mr. Moto! How do you do?
That, of course, is the Mad Russian that was a character at the time played by Bert Gordon, so, yeah, it's pretty common. Clampett must have really enjoyed that. So the surprise reveal at the end as to who the villain is, it's someone that's been in a few Warner Brothers cartoons, but for those who don't know, it's Hugh Herbert, who was a film comedian, and yeah, he'd been in many, many films around this time, and of course he was also he originated in vaudeville. An animation highlight for me is this scene here, where Clampett was doing even amazing things, like even with his original unit before he took over Tex Avery's unit a few years later. I mean, look at that. That is just fantastic. And it would be pretty difficult to do, I would think. Now, okay, the voice by Mel Blanc here is, of course, problematic. He's doing basically a stereotyped Japanese voice, the voice of Porky, but I have to admire Mel Blanc's skill here in actually taking one of his voices and doing another accent and still making it sound like the original character. It just shows how brilliant he was as a performer.
Mr. Moto talking? A phantom? Oh, Mr. Moto, leave for home.
Now, I won't go into too much detail here, but this cartoon was actually colorized twice. Now, it was done first in the 60s, in those cheap Korean redrawn ones, and given the abundance of Asian stereotypes back then, like a Breakfast at Tiffany's, that's not surprising. But what is surprising is that it was colorized again in the 90s, which was more closer to this black and white version. But here's the thing, who watched this cartoon and thought, hey, this is acceptable, given the stereotype? I don't know, but it was definitely colorized twice, and that just surprised me. And now, much like I did with the Lone Ranger, here is a brief history of the Mr. Moto character. So, initially, Mr. Moto was a Japanese secret agent in 6 books created by author John P. Marquand. If I said it correctly, I apologize if I butchered that. In any case, so these novels, with the exception of the final one, had the character be an agent of Japan during the expansionist era where Japan was making inroads into China during the 30s. Now, when it was adapted to film, the character was changed completely into an international detective working for Interpol who had great skill at judo. So initially there were 8 films released between 1937 to 1939, prior to the outbreak of World War II, all of which starred Peter Lorre, who, as you may be aware, is not of Japanese descent. So, to put things into context for those who may not be aware, so you had white actors portraying African Americans in blackface, you've had actors of other races portraying Native Americans like Italians, Spanish, and so on. Asians at the time, unfortunately, they were only cast typically in smaller roles, and usually in only stereotypical roles. So for example, you might have Asians only in Chinatown sequences and that sort of thing. But also, with very rare exceptions, major roles starring Asian characters would be played by white actors. So you had actors like Warner Oland playing Charlie Chan. You had Boris Karloff at one stage playing Fu Manchu. In fact, Warner Oland even played Fu Manchu as well beforehand. And, this trend would continue many years later. You had Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, you had Joseph Wiseman as Dr. No, and plenty of other examples. But, back to Mr. Moto. The films released around this time were Think Fast, Mr. Moto, Thank You, Mr. Moto, Mr. Moto's Gamble, Mr. Moto Takes a Chance, Mysterious Mr. Moto, Mr. Moto's Last Warning, Mr. Moto in Danger Island, and Mr. Moto Takes a Vacation. The films themselves were actually pretty well received by audiences at the time. Reviews were kind of mixed depending on the film. Some, of course, were received better than others, but generally speaking, they were pretty good. Now, Peter Lorre accepted the role as it gave him a chance to play the role of the hero, because usually around this time he was playing sinister villains. While timing-wise, it would appear that the series ended during World War II, just one of those little coincidences, it was actually due to Peter Lorre leaving the studio that were making these films, which were 20th Century Fox. And he was no longer under contract with them. But it is a safe bet that had the series continued, they probably would have been cancelled due to the war, and of course Japan being part of the Axis powers. After the war, the character really wasn't used particularly often. I mean, there were some interesting highlights. So you had a brief 1951 radio show. You've also got some weird adaptations like Stopover Tokyo, starring Robert Wagner, that was adapted from a Mr. Moto book, but removed the Mr. Moto character altogether. And there's a weird 1965 film called Mr. Moto Returns, which has nothing to do with the previous films, and changed up the character yet again. In fact, the only consistency is that once again, they cast a non-white actor as Mr. Moto. And if you're a fan of The Karate Kid, well, that's where the Mr. Moto part comes from. So, there you go. Now, as far as the rating goes, I'm giving this one about 6.5 out of 10. It's sort of mid-tier Clampett. It's got some funny moments, but it's not as entertaining as a lot of the ones he did around this time. But, I could do a lot worse than this one. So, that'll do it for this video. So, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Invisible Man is...
That's all, folks.